Pranam at the lotus feet of the mother. Om Sri Mata Saranam Mama. Om Sri Aurobindo Saranam Mama. Namaste. Good evening. Welcome everyone. Today we are going to discuss a beautiful topic on aspiration. The topic of discussion for today is on aspiration. As we know, while discussing on the growth of consciousness, the basic requisites when we speak of, when we discuss, or when we aspire, that is actually the first comes aspiration. So when we are talking of the aspiration, there also comes another word, desire. So sometimes we confuse ourselves within with two words. One is desire and another is aspiration. Sri Aurobindo clarifies in Life Divine, as you know, as you must be knowing all, only for four things we aspire, that is freedom, God, light and immortality. Light, immortality, God and freedom we aspire for. Excluding all these four, what for we think of, what for we cherish, that is coming under the desire. So Sri Aurobindo gives one bright example, bright lines. Sri Aurobindo writes in Savitri, desire is the child heart's cry crying for bliss. Desire is the child heart's cry crying for bliss. When he speaks of the aspiration, he speaks, aspiration shows the image of a crown. This is the basic difference and this is the great difference. Desire is the child heart's cry crying for bliss, only for bliss, to satisfy his needs. As the child cries only for his needs, toys, chocolates or something, or he wants to be taken into his mother's arms, for that he is crying like this desire. But aspiration shows the image of a crown, the crown that is awaiting you for. For this crown we are in the process, we are doing sadhana, we are proceeding forward in the evolutionary process. Then comes, how shall we know? Sri Aurobindo speaks of aspiration. When somebody stops aspiring, he begins to die. When somebody stops aspiring, he begins to die. Desire may be filled up, may not be filled up. But things is that when you stop aspiring, when somebody stops aspiring, he begins to die. Let us have something on Sri Aurobindo's and Mother's writings. In the book The Mother, Sri Aurobindo spoke, the personal effort of the sadhaka remains necessary, but so long as the lower nature is active, the personal effort of the sadhaka remains necessary. Initial phase, as long as the lower nature is active in the sadhaka, the personal effort required is personal effort of the sadhaka remains necessary. Then what are the personal effort required? The personal effort required is a triple labor of aspiration, rejection and surrender. Triple labor, three things we must be coincidentally, simultaneously it will go: aspiration, rejection and surrender. So basic three principles we are not going to discuss, only we will concentrate here upon aspiration. Sri Aurobindo has written a single line on aspiration in the Mother, chapter 2. An aspiration, vigilant, constant, unceasing. The mind's will, the heart seeking, the ascent of the vital being, the will to open and make plastic the physical consciousness and nature. This is the about very small line, very smoothly in the initial phase in chapter 2, Sri Aurobindo quoted here. An aspiration, how is it? Vigilant, constant, unceasing. Vigilant, constant and unceasing, this thus is the aspiration. The mind's will, the heart seeking, the ascent of the vital being, the will to open and make plastic the physical consciousness and nature. These are things said by Sri Aurobindo on aspiration. So let us take couple of lines how Sri Aurobindo tries to speak of and describes on aspiration. All sincere aspiration has its effect. Sri Aurobindo speaks of, all sincere aspiration has its effect. If the aspiration is sincere, the effect is sure, a thing decreed, inevitable and irresistible. If you are not constant in aspirations, in the initial line say is that sincere aspiration he said of, then she said, then second line we are taking from his writings, if you are not constant in aspiration, if there is that lacks consistency, if there is no aspiration is not constant, the nature will then sink back into the old lower ways. The nature which is trying to exceed the limits, but actually with if there is lack of consistency, if the aspiration is not constant, then the nature will then sink back into the old lower ways. Pool, it has initially it is rising up, then it will once again without as constant aspiration it will sink down into the old nature lower ways. Sri Aurobindo speaks of you have to aspire. There is no other go. Aspiration is the basic requisite that just now we have discussed initially. Aspire intensely, but without impatience. Impatience must not be there. It is not this yoga is not the thing that is done in a day. It is a progressive attitude. It has to go. Time, don't fix any time or any date or anything or any fixed law. Don't fix like this, because this aspiration should be intense. We must aspire intensely, but there should be not at all any least impatience. Impatience must be prohibited. Then Sri Aurobindo speaks another thing. There is no need of words in aspiration. In aspiration, words have no need. There is no need of words in aspiration. It can be expressed or unexpressed in words. Without even words or with words, it can be expressed. So in aspiration, there is no place for the words. No need of the words in aspiration. It can be expressed or unexpressed in words. And finally, Sri Aurobindo comes to speak us, the intensity of aspiration brings the intensity of experience. So when and how intense we are in our aspiration, thus we'll get the intensity of experience, and by repeated intensity of experience there comes the change. Beautiful line, the main interesting line and the most important lines here on the speaks of, the intensity of aspiration brings the intensity of experience. With the aspiration comes the experience. With the intensity of aspiration, there comes the intensity of experience. But by repeated intensity of experience, if this intensity is repeated, if it is a continuous, it is ceaseless, then there will come the change. The change is then bound to change because there is aspiration. Aspiration is always related and with tagged with the divine attitude. So we'll go a little further in Sri Aurobindo's writing. We'll see what Sri Aurobindo speaks of regarding aspiration. The development of the experience in its rapidity, its amplitude, intensity and power of its result depends primarily in the beginning of the path and long after on the aspiration and personal effort of the sadhaka. Initially, already we have discussed when we are in the initial phase, these are the things required. So I will try to quote it again. The development of the experience in its rapidity, its amplitude, the intensity and power of its result depends primarily and in the beginning of the path and long after on the aspiration and personal effort of the sadhaka. Then Sri Aurobindo quotes second line. The process of yoga is a turning of the human soul from the egoistic state of consciousness observed in the outward appearances and attractions of things to a high state of which the transcendent and universal can pour itself into the individual mood and transform it. So initially there must be aspiration in the beginning and long after and personal effort of the sadhaka. Second, Sri Aurobindo speaks of that the state of consciousness. The process of yoga is turning the human soul from the egoistic state of consciousness. From the egoistic state of consciousness, we have to evolve. It is now in the we are observed in outward appearances and attraction of the egoistic state of consciousness of things. It has to go, it has to cross the limit, and it has to reach the higher state in which the transcendent and universal shall pour into the individual mood and transform it. It has two things, transcendent and universal. They will pour itself into the individual and make it transformed. The first determining element is siddhi. Very nice thing, the important thing, the first determining element of the siddhi is therefore intensity of turning and the force which directs the soul inward. Then the power of aspiration of the heart, the force of the will, the concentration of the mind, the perseverance and the determination of the applied energy are the measure of that intensity. Already we have taken the intensity of aspiration and intensity of aspiration we have decided and we have discussed initially. So Sri Aurobindo speaks of the power of aspiration of the heart, the force of the will, the concentration of the mind, the perseverance and the determination of the applied energy are the measure of the intensity. So the ideal sadhaka should be able to say in biblical phrase, my zeal for the Lord has eaten me up. Very beautiful line. Sri Aurobindo speaks, my zeal for the Lord has eaten me up. So what is the zeal? It is this zeal for the Lord that is known as Utshaha, the four basic instruments when we have discussed just initially, just before some time in the near future, four basic instruments. I mean, sadhana chatushta when we are discussing the topic, the zeal, utshaha of the for the Lord, utshaha, the zeal of the whole nature for the divine results, that it is known as otherwise Vyakulata. So the heart's eagerness for the attainment of the divine, heart's eagerness for the attainment of the divine, Sri Aurobindo spoke of. What is the attainment? What is the human effort, personal effort of the term personal effort we have heard? What is the personal effort of the human being's personal effort? How long it can go? Sri Aurobindo speaks of attainment of God is the sole object of all human efforts. All human effort must have the goal of reaching or attaining the attainment of God. That devours the ego must be in the integral yoga for the sadhaka. In the process of sadhana, there is absolutely no place for the ego, and breaks up the limitations of the petty and narrow mood for the full and wide reception of that which seeks, and that which being universal and exceeds, and being transcended surpasses. Initially, that is being universal, it exceeds. Being transcended surpasses even the largest and highest individual self and nature. This is the thing, the major point Sri Aurobindo speaks of. Then one beautiful line Sri Aurobindo writes, the psychic fire within must be lit, to which all must be thrown with the divine name on it. As the stone was thrown into the sea for the Setubandha, that river bridge was for reaching of the banners and Ramasenas in the Lanka. So like this, there name Rama Nam was written. So like this, the all must be thrown into the psychic fire with the divine name in it. It's then I was asking, what is the process? The psychic fire must always be lit. The three processes, three methods Sri Aurobindo has spoken of. One is number one, by aspiration. Number two, by the will of the progress, by the urge towards perfection. Third one is above all, the will for progress and self-purification, which lights the fire. The will for progress, that is the major thing, but major process comes, that is our known as aspiration. Sri Aurobindo speaks of two words. This is the first thing necessary, aspiration for the divine. This is the first requirement. The second thing, or second aspiration, second important need is that the next thing you have to do is to tend to this aspiration, to keep it always alert and awake and living. This has to be done. And for that, what is required is concentration of the divine with a view to integral and absolute concentration of the will and the purpose. So this aspiration plays the major role in the process of sadhana. So before concluding, I must try to conclude or try to quote 2 or 3 lines from Savitri. In all who have risen to a greater life, a voice of unborn things whispers to the ear. To their eyes, visited by some high sunlight, aspiration shows the image of a crowd. Thank you. Vande Mataram.